Hello, I'm Erich Hoyt, and I'm happy to talk to you today and to try to formulate a governance approach that could be used to push forward the Mediterranean Cetacean Migration Corridor, MPA, and to make it something that would work positively for the cetaceans that live there. Now, this is a unique and interesting MPA being declared under Spanish law in 2018 and entering the SPAMI list of the Barcelona Convention in 2019, and the fact that it's focused on protection as a cetacean corridor, which is fairly unique. Now, as I outlined in the annex to the report that was put together, there are various types of governance frameworks that could be used, management bodies that the group that holds authority and responsibility for an MPA and for executing the management plan can be divided into four main types of governance. The first, by government, is by far the most common. It can be often at the federal level, but can also be subnational or even regional or local. Sometimes the governments will delegate the management to an NGO or to another group, an academic, a university. Shared governance, in which, for example, the government might equally share the management with an NGO or a university. Sometimes this is used in transboundary management, the shared governance idea, but it can also be shared within other contexts. Private governance by an NGO, university, individual owner, depending on the situation. And then there is governance by indigenous peoples or local people. Governance by government, as I said, is the most common type, and this includes government delegated management, which happens in some countries. It's a top-down approach. It can work with substantial stakeholder involvement and ideally from the beginning of the process, but that's not always what happens. Among more than 110 marine protected areas in 19 Mediterranean countries, it's notable that MedPan, the network of MPA managers, records 124 NGOs and institutions that either have direct responsibility for managing an MPA or are involved in the development of MPAs. So this gives you an idea of a delegated governance as well as governance by government. Now, shared governance in Mozambique, Bazaruto Archipelago National Marine Park is run under contract with African Parks, an NGO, which operates land-based protected areas and game parks in South Africa to a very high standard. This is the first MPA that it's worked on, but the government has essentially hired African parks to do the job of management under contract, and then it also can see over time how it does with that under that contract. In Canada, a number of MPAs and PAs, protected areas, such as the Guayhanas National Park, has a much longer name, but usually referred to as Guayhanas. They have shared governance between government and indigenous people and the local community, which has worked very well in the Queen Charlotte, formerly called Queen Charlotte Islands, partly because these are recognized as heritage Haida lands and waters. The role of science is central to the success of this particular MPA. In view of the technical nature of of understanding the transmission of noise and mitigating the potential ship strike impacts on sperm whales and other cetaceans, a strong scientific advisory board with substantial input and influence over final decisions would be essential. Now, this scientific advisory body should also participate in or co-lead the monitoring efforts that are going to be necessary to determine effectiveness and compliance, and then it can respond to continuing recommendations. I would suggest that one or more scientists would also serve on the management body and participate in the meetings of the stakeholder advisory body. This could give a lot more traction to the science, and the scientists could explain their findings better and provide a route toward greatest cooperation and understanding. So looking at the four major options for governance, and considering that this is the Mediterranean Cetacean Migration Corridor, MPA, i.e. that it focuses on cetaceans that are moving through the area, and that the situation is that the main threats to cetaceans are ship strikes and noise, I would suggest that the governance framework that could serve as the strongest starting point would be governance by government, shared collaboratively with a nonprofit organization, an NGO, with a strong scientific backing. Now, the first agenda item I would suggest for this governance framework to consider would be making this cetacean corridor into a particularly sensitive sea area, a PSSA, under the International Maritime Organization, noting that there is one as well that has gone through further east in the Mediterranean for fin whales and sperm whales. This could almost be a continuation or a separate one. But of course, this requires, setting up a PSSA requires government authority, so that would be considerably aided by an NGO with access to the scientific expertise to help the process. So that's another good reason why governance between government, shared between government and an NGO makes sense. Now, no matter the type of governance that's used, these are 9 characteristics, 9 principles that the United Nations, UNDP, has put together, and I would suggest that's a very good basis for cooperation, especially in my suggested governance type being shared. I won't go over these in detail, but you can see them here. Other considerations may need to be made for areas outside the MPA, partly in view of the characteristics of sound transmission as it travels over long distances, as well as ship strike issues, because the ships are moving in and out of the area, and the cetaceans as well. And so some kind of consideration toward these outer areas might also be part of the mandate for this shared governance. It's also been noted that other marine wildlife with various sensitivities to noise will use the MPA as residents or in transiting to breeding or feeding areas, including loggerhead and other marine turtles, tuna, sharks, and seabirds. Now, it's also important to consider that migratory paths, if not entire habitats, may move temporarily or spatially in response to changing conditions. Determining the sensitivities of various other species as well as recommending precautionary approaches, would be a central role of the scientific advisory body. So in conclusion, the most important thing is for governments, NGOs, scientists, and stakeholders to agree to do something, to put a plan forward, and to embed the idea of adaptive management, including management plan revisions made periodically, say every 5 years. Even if after an MPA is fully functioning and the management plan is in place, it remains a work in progress, subject to changing conditions. That's environmental, including climate change and other anthropogenic factors. And so periodic review and renewal is needed. Learning as you go along in the process of adaptive management gives an MPA management body flexibility and permission to make changes to determine the best practices. Let's say that no one can design and set up the perfect system right at the start. There need to be engaged participants and scientists across all sectors. And don't forget funding. This is another reason why it's important to have a joint government and NGO or other governance offering potentially independent funding streams and options for going ahead. These MPAs globally are woefully underfunded, and the funding, it's great to have all the good ideas and to set this up, but then if it's not properly funded, it's not going to work. Thank you very much.